The afternoon sun hung like a blazing ball in the endless Arizona sky. The air shimmered with heat, and even the lizards hid under rocks to escape the burning light. Two young Apache girls, Ayana and Sani, walked carefully along a dry riverbed, their small feet leaving soft prints in the sand. They were sisters, Ayana. The older one at 15 was calm and thoughtful, while 12-year-old Sani was lively and full of questions about everything she saw. They had left their village early that morning to collect herbs and wild plants their mother used for medicine. Their woven baskets were half filled with desert sage, prickly pear fruit, and dry roots that gave off a strong smell when crushed. Their mother, Nalin, had taught them that every plant had a spirit, and that those who learned to listen could hear what the desert wanted to say. As they walked farther, Ayana noticed the silence around them. No wind whispered through the rocks and no hawks circled above. It was as if the desert was holding its breath. She raised her hand, stopping Sani from speaking. "Something's wrong," she murmured. The younger girl frowned, her dark eyes wide. "What is it?" Ayana listened carefully. Then she heard it, a low, strange sound, almost like a groan carried by the wind. It came again, soft but clear. Without saying a word, the sisters followed the sound, climbing over a ridge of sharp stones. On the other side, they saw a horse standing still, its head hanging low, its body covered in dust. The animal's eyes looked tired, and it gave a weak snort when it saw them. Just a few feet away lay a man, motionless, half covered by his long coat. His hat had rolled away, and his face was pale under a layer of dirt. He looked to be one of the cowboys who sometimes passed through Apache land, though few ever came this far into the canyon. Ayana's first thought was to run home and tell their mother, but Sani stepped forward before she could stop her. "Maybe he's sleeping," Sani whispered, but when she bent down she saw that his lips were dry and cracked and his skin was hot from the sun. He was breathing, barely, but enough for Ayana to know he was still alive. Ayana knelt beside him, her heart pounding. "We can't leave him," she said softly. "He will die out here." Sani looked nervous. "But Mama said we must not bring outsiders to the camp." "What if he is a bad man?" Ayana hesitated. She knew her sister was right. Their people had learned to be careful. For many years, strangers had brought pain and trouble. But now, looking at this man, helpless and silent, she couldn't walk away. "Maybe," she said. "But right now he's only a man who needs help." The horse whinnied softly as if agreeing. Ayana touched its neck, feeling how thin and tired it was. "He has not had water in days," she said. She took a small gourd from her basket and poured some of their drinking water into her hand, letting the horse lick it up. Then she turned back to the man. The sisters didn't have much, only their small baskets, some cloth, and a long scarf Ayana wore to protect her head from the sun. They shaded the man with the scarf, then searched for a place where the earth was cooler. Together they tried to lift him, but he was heavy. Still, they managed to drag him slowly into the shadow of a large rock. Sani wiped her forehead. "We must bring him to Mother," she said finally. "She will know what to do," Ayana nodded. "We can use his horse," she said. It took all their strength and patience, but the sisters managed to get the man onto the horse's back, holding him steady with rope and care. The sun was sinking lower now, and long shadows stretched across the desert floor. The ride home was slow, and the horse stumbled more than once. The sisters walked beside it, whispering to keep the animal calm. By the time they reached the edge of their village, the sky had turned deep orange, and the smell of evening fires drifted through the air. A few elders looked up as they entered, eyes widening in surprise at the sight of a strange man slumped over a horse. Ayana could feel the weight of their stares, the quiet questions forming behind them. She didn't answer. Instead, she guided the horse straight to her family's hut. Their mother, Nalin, was sitting outside grinding herbs on a flat stone. She looked up calmly, though her eyes sharpened as she took in the scene. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with warning. "He was alone in the desert," Ayana said quickly. "We found him lying there. He is hurt. We couldn't leave him." For a long moment, Nalin said nothing. Then she rose and walked closer, her long dark braids swinging behind her. Her face was lined from years of wind and sun, but her eyes were deep and clear. She looked at the man, then at her daughters. "You did a brave thing," she said at last, "but also a dangerous one." Ayana lowered her gaze. "I know, Mother, but he was dying." Nalin nodded slowly. "Then bring him inside." The girls shared a look of relief. Inside the hut, The air was cool and filled with the scent of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. Nellen spread a blanket on the floor and gestured for them to lay the man down gently. She examined him with practiced hands, checking his breathing and the pulse at his neck. "He is very weak," she said. "Dehydration and fever." She called for water and Sani hurried to bring it. Nellen carefully poured a few drops onto the man's lips. He stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. They were light-colored like the desert sky and full of confusion. But before he could speak, he fainted again. Sani watched in wonder. "Do you think he will live?" "If the spirits allow," Nellen replied. "But we must keep him cool." Ayana wet a cloth. "Sani, fetch the white clay from the riverbank and it will draw out the heat." The girls moved quickly, following her instructions. Nellen worked with quiet focus, mixing herbs, whispering old words that her mother had taught her. Outside, night fell and the sound of crickets filled the air. When the stars appeared, the small fire inside the hut glowed softly, throwing golden light across the man's face. His breathing was still shallow but steadier now. Nellen sat beside him, her hands resting in her lap. Sani leaned close to her sister. "Do you think he is a cowboy?" she whispered. Ayana nodded. "He wears their kind of clothes." "But why was he alone? Cowboys travel in groups." "Maybe he was lost," Sani said. "Or maybe he came here for something." "Or someone," Ayana replied, though she wasn't sure what she meant. They fell silent again, listening to the quiet rise and fall of his breath. Nellen looked at her daughters, her face softening. "You both have kind hearts," she said gently. "The world does not always reward kindness, but it is still a gift worth giving." Sani smiled sleepily. "You always say that, Mama." "And I will keep saying it," Nellen said, touching her cheek. "Now rest. Tomorrow we will see if the stranger wakes." The sisters lay down on their sleeping mats, the desert wind whispering faintly through the cracks in the hut walls. Outside, the stars burned bright, cold and far away but beautiful. Ayana stared at them for a long time, her thoughts full of questions. Who was this man? Where had he come from? And what would happen when he opened his eyes again? In the soft light of dawn, she finally drifted to sleep. The man still lay silent beside the fire, but his chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. The desert had tried to take his life, but two young girls, and guided by nothing but instinct and compassion, had given him another chance. Neither of them knew that their simple act of kindness would soon change everything, not just for the stranger they had saved, but for their entire family and even their people. For now, all was quiet. The first bird of morning called from the rocks, and the sun began to rise again over the canyon, bright, eternal, and unaware of the story that had just begun. When the first morning light slipped through the cracks of the hut, the desert was already awake. The air was cool for a few short moments before the sun began to rise higher, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and red. Inside the small home, Nellen sat beside the stranger, her eyes calm but thoughtful. She had not slept the entire night. Ayana woke first, rubbing her eyes and sitting up quietly. The man was still there, lying on the blanket, breathing softly. His face looked more peaceful now, not as pale as before. Sani stirred next and tiptoed closer. "Is he better, Mama?" she asked. "A little," Nellen said. "The fever is not as strong. The herbs are helping." She dipped a cloth into a bowl of cool water and placed it on his forehead. Then she looked at her daughters. "We will need more of the healing root before nightfall. It grows near the creek," the girls nodded. Ayana filled a basket and left with Sani, their feet making soft sounds on the dusty ground. Around them, the village was beginning to stir. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sound of people talking drifted through the air. Some of the older women watched the sisters as they passed, whispering quietly to each other. Everyone had heard that Nellen and her daughters had brought a white man into their home. It was not a usual thing to do. The Apache had learned through years of hardship to keep their distance from outsiders. Strangers brought change, and change was not always kind. When the girls returned with the herbs, they found their mother mixing them into a thick paste. The smell was sharp but pleasant. She spread it over a piece of clean cloth and pressed it gently against the man's side, where his shirt had been torn. His body tensed for a moment, but he did not wake. Sani knelt beside her mother. "What is his name, do you think?" "We will know when he tells us," Nellen replied softly. "For now, we call him the stranger." The rest of the day passed quietly. The man drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes whispering words they didn't understand. Once, when the wind blew strong, he muttered something about a horse and a storm. Nalin listened but said nothing. As the sun began to fall again, Nalin sent her daughters to gather wood for the evening fire. When they returned, they found 2 men from the village standing outside the hut. One of them was Taza, the tribal scout. His sharp eyes rested on the stranger through the open doorway. "You brought him here?" he asked, his voice firm but not unkind. "My daughters found him in the desert," Nalin said. "He was dying." Taza folded his arms. "You know the rules. We do not shelter outsiders. If others see him here, there will be talk, maybe trouble." "I know," Nalin said calmly. "But the spirits teach us to heal, not to turn away from those in need." Taza hesitated. He had known Nalin all his life. She was wise and kind, and her medicine had saved many of their own. "Be careful," he said finally. "If he brings danger, it will not fall on your home alone." When he left, Sani turned to her mother. "Are they angry with us?" "Not angry," Nalin said softly. "Only afraid. Fear grows quickly when people do not understand." That night, a gentle wind moved through the canyon. The family sat by the fire, and Nalin began to tell stories, old ones about the stars and the spirits of the earth. The flickering light made shadows dance on the hut's walls, and for a while, the world outside felt far away. In the middle of one of her stories, the man stirred again. His eyes fluttered open, pale blue and filled with confusion. He tried to sit up but groaned softly. Nalin was beside him in an instant. "Rest," she said in a calm voice. "You are safe." He looked around, trying to understand where he was. "Where am I?" His voice was weak and rough, as though he had not spoken in days. "You are in our home," Nalin replied. "My daughters found you in the desert. You were near death." The man blinked slowly. "Your daughters?" Ayana and Sani stepped forward, standing side by side. They looked curious but cautious. "Thank you," the man whispered. "You saved me." "You should not speak too much," Nalin said, handing him a small wooden cup. "Drink this. It will help your strength." He took it with trembling hands and drank. The bitter taste made him wince, but warmth spread through his body. "What is your name?" Ayana asked quietly. He hesitated, as if trying to remember. "Thomas," he said at last. "Thomas Reed." Sani repeated it softly, testing the sound. "Thomas," he gave a small smile. "Yes. Rest now, Thomas," Nalin said. "There will be time to talk later." Over the next few days, Thomas began to grow stronger. He could sit up by the fire, though he still moved carefully. He watched the sisters as they worked, grinding herbs or fetching water. Sometimes he would ask questions about the land, the people, the strange songs Nalin hummed while she worked. Sani liked to talk, and she often answered before her sister could. "That song is a prayer," she told him one evening. "It calls for the spirits to bless the one who listens." Thomas smiled faintly. "Then I am lucky," he said. But not everyone in the village shared his luck. Some of the men came to Nalin again, warning her that helping an outsider could bring trouble. Others whispered that the stranger might be a scout or a thief. Ayana heard some of the talk while fetching water one afternoon. It made her uneasy. When she returned home, she found her mother sitting outside looking toward the canyon. "Mama," she said softly, "what if they make us send him away?" Nalin looked at her for a long moment. "If the spirits wanted him to die, they would not have placed him in your path," she said. "We cannot undo what kindness has already done." That night, as the stars appeared again, Thomas thanked them once more. "I owe you my life," he said. "I will repay your kindness somehow." "You owe us nothing," Nalin said gently. "What is given from the heart is never a debt." Still, Ayana noticed something change in her mother's eyes when she said those words. A shadow, small but clear. The following morning, Thomas asked if he could see his horse. The animal had been tied near the creek where there was fresh water and grass. Ayana led him there slowly, walking beside him so he would not fall. The horse lifted its head and neighed softly when it saw him. Thomas reached out, touching its mane. "You did well, old friend," he murmured. His eyes grew damp. "I thought we'd both be gone." Ayana watched quietly. "You love your horse very much," she said. He nodded. "He's been with me for years. We were riding from the southern plains when—" He stopped, pressing his hand to his side. "When we were attacked. Men wanted what I carried. My wages, the money I earned." Ayana frowned. "You were alone?" He nodded. "Too alone. When they returned, Nalin was waiting. She looked at Thomas carefully, as if studying more than just his body. "You were carrying money?" she asked slowly. "Yes," Thomas said. "A pouch of coins. I wanted to take them to my mother. She's a widow." Nalin said nothing for a long time. Then she turned to stir the pot hanging over the fire. "You should rest again," she said quietly. That evening, the sisters could tell something was different about their mother. She was thoughtful, her eyes far away. Sani asked, "Mama, are you worried?" Nalin smiled faintly. "The desert teaches us that every good deed can wake both light and shadow. We must be ready for what follows." Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying the smell of dust and faraway rain. The small flame of their fire danced and flickered. Inside the hut, Thomas closed his eyes, whispering a quiet thank you to the people who had saved him. He did not know that in the days ahead, his presence would test every boundary of trust that Nalin and her daughters had ever known. But for now, under the calm light of the fire, the 3 Apache women and the lone cowboy shared one peaceful evening. 4 lives crossing paths in a world that rarely showed mercy. None of them could guess how deeply that meeting would change them all. The days passed slowly, and the stranger named Thomas grew stronger with each sunrise. His cheeks began to show color again, and he could walk a little farther each morning before needing rest. The small hut that once held only the sound of the wind now carried the low hum of voices, the soft laughter of Sani, the quiet questions from Ayana, and the patient answers from Nalin as she worked. Outside, the desert changed color every hour. In the morning it was gold. By afternoon it turned white with heat, and at sunset it glowed red like a living flame. Thomas often sat outside the hut to watch the sky, amazed at how wide and endless it looked. "It feels like the earth has no end here," he said one evening. Ayana smiled. "The land is our teacher," she said. "It shows us how to live, to be strong, but also to bend when the wind comes." Thomas nodded. "Your people have wisdom. I never saw the world like that before." Sani was sitting nearby, stringing beads.
"Maybe your world is too busy to listen," she said.
"The desert only speaks to those who are quiet." Thomas chuckled softly. "You might be right, little one." The girls had grown used to his gentle voice. It was strange at first to have an outsider among them, but now it felt almost normal. Thomas helped where he could, carrying wood, fixing a broken water jug, even mending the old fence near the creek. Still, not everyone in the village approved. Sometimes, when Ayana went to fetch water, she could feel the weight of others' eyes on her. Some women whispered that kindness to strangers could invite misfortune. Ayana didn't reply, but her heart felt heavy. She wondered if their act of mercy might bring harm, even though it had come from a place of good. One afternoon, Thomas asked if he could thank the girls properly. "If not for you," he said, "I would have been gone. I want you to know who I am, so you'll understand why I was out there." They gathered around the fire as the sun began to sink. The desert turned soft and pink. Nalin sat beside her daughters, listening quietly. Thomas took a slow breath. "I was born in a small town near the Rio Grande," he began. "My father worked with cattle, and from the time I could walk, I worked with him. But when I was 16, he passed away. My mother stayed in town, sewing clothes for travelers. I took work on a ranch far away so I could send her money." He looked into the fire. "A few weeks ago, the ranch owner paid us for the season. I was riding home with my wages in a leather pouch. I was thinking about how happy my mother would be when I gave it to her." He smiled faintly, then his eyes grew distant. "But I didn't make it far. Some men followed me, men who wanted what I carried. I tried to lose them in the desert, but I lost my way instead. My horse kept me alive longer than I deserved." Sani leaned forward, her eyes wide. "So you were alone all that time?" "Yes," Thomas said softly. "I thought it was the end. When I saw the sky that last evening, I thought I'd never open my eyes again." Ayana looked at her mother. "But you did," she said. "The spirits must have wanted you to live." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then maybe they sent you?" Nalin's expression did not change, but her eyes were full of thought. "Sometimes the spirits test us in strange ways," she said. "Not every gift comes without weight." Thomas didn't fully understand, but he could feel that her words carried something deeper. In the days that followed, Thomas began to help more around the camp. He was careful not to overstep, always asking permission before touching anything. He learned some of the Apache words for the things around him: Nadi for water, Shash for bear, Yaz for snow. The girls laughed as he tried to pronounce them. You say it wrong every time, Sanny teased. Thomas laughed too. Then you must be my teacher. At night they often sat outside watching the stars. Thomas told stories about the towns to the east, about trains that ran like thunder and lamps that burned without fire. The girls listened, fascinated. In return, they shared their own stories, of the coyote who stole the moon, and the hawk who carried messages to the sky. But even as laughter filled the evenings, Nalin grew quieter. She watched Thomas closely, especially when he mentioned the pouch of money. One morning when he stepped outside to water the horse, she whispered to her daughters, "Do not speak of that pouch to anyone in the village. If word spreads, greedy hearts will follow." Ayana frowned. "Do you think the men who chased him might come here?" Nalin looked toward the distant hills. "If the desert carried him to us, it can carry them too." That night, while the others slept, Nalin sat by the fire thinking. Her mother had once told her that every act of kindness calls to both light and shadow. She hoped the shadow would not find them. The next day, a soft wind blew across the canyon. Thomas was feeling well enough to walk beyond the creek. Ayana and Sani went with him carrying small baskets. They showed him where the wild herbs grew and how to tell which ones were good for healing. As they walked, Sani plucked a flower and tucked it behind her ear. "You don't have these where you live, do you?" she asked. Thomas shook his head. "No. Where I come from, the land is greener, but not as alive as this. The desert looks empty until you really see it. Then it feels full of stories." Ayana smiled at that. "That is what Mother says. The desert has more life than the eye can see." When they returned, the air felt heavier somehow. Nalin stood outside the hut looking toward the horizon. The sky had grown dark with clouds, not just from rain, but from something deeper. She said nothing, only motioned for them to come inside. After supper, Thomas sat quietly, noticing her mood. "You seem troubled," he said gently. Nalin looked at him. "I am wondering what waits beyond the desert. You say you were carrying money. Did you lose it?" Thomas hesitated. "I think it fell when I fell from my horse," he said. "I had it in my coat, but when I woke in your home it was gone. Maybe it's still out there, or maybe those men took it." Nalin nodded slowly, though her face gave away nothing. "If you find it again," she said, "what will you do with it?" He smiled sadly. "I'll take it to my mother. She has little. I promised her I'd come home with enough to fix our roof before the rains come." For a moment no one spoke. The fire crackled softly. Then Nalin said, "A promise is a strong thing, stronger than any coin." Thomas looked thoughtful. "You speak as though you've carried promises too heavy to bear." She gave a faint smile. "Every mother does." The next morning, Thomas woke early to the sound of Ayana grinding corn. The light of dawn spilled through the doorway. He stood stretching slowly and saw that Nalin was sitting outside, looking toward the desert again. Something in her stillness made him pause. He walked over and sat beside her. "You've been kind to me," he said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." Nalin looked at him, her face unreadable. "Kindness is not a thing that asks for thanks. It only asks for wisdom." Thomas frowned slightly. "Wisdom?" "To know when to keep it," she said, "and when to let it go." Her words stayed with him for the rest of the day. There was something in her tone, something that made him feel both grateful and uneasy. That night, as the stars shone above, Ayana dreamed of voices in the wind, men calling out, far away, their words too faint to understand. When she woke, she could still hear the echo of it. She looked over at her mother, who was already awake watching the horizon. Nalin's voice was quiet but firm. "Storms are not only made of rain," she said. "Sometimes they come wearing the faces of men." The air outside was still and heavy, as if waiting for something. Inside the small hut, Thomas slept peacefully, unaware that his story, and the secrets it carried, had already begun to stir the winds of change around them. The sun was setting when Thomas sat outside, watching the sky turn from orange to purple. The desert air felt heavy that evening. The wind carried a faint coolness, but it also brought silence, the kind of silence that made even the birds quiet. Inside the hut, Ayana and Sani prepared food while their mother worked in the dim light, her movements calm but thoughtful. Thomas turned his head toward the sound of soft footsteps. Ayana came out carrying a bowl of soup. "You should eat," she said gently. "Mother says strength must be rebuilt slowly." He smiled, tired but grateful. "Your mother is a wise woman," he said. I owe her more than I can ever repay. Ayana sat near the doorway, folding her knees beneath her. You have already repaid her, she said. When you tell us your stories, we learn things we never knew. Thomas looked into the bowl for a long moment before speaking. I think your people have taught me more than my stories ever could. The wind rose slightly, moving her hair across her face. The world around them glowed in the soft light of the fire, peaceful but fragile. That night, as the family sat together, the air seemed to grow tense in a way none of them could explain. Thomas noticed Nalan looking often toward the east as if she were waiting for something. When he asked if she was well, she only said quietly, "The wind changes before a storm." The next day passed more slowly than usual. The sun felt sharper, the air drier. Even the animals seemed restless. Thomas tried to help with the chores, but he felt Nalan's eyes watching him from time to time. It wasn't unkind, but it was careful, like a person studying a puzzle whose answer she already knew. By afternoon, Ayana noticed dust in the distance. She pointed toward it. Look, Mama, she said softly. Something is coming. Nalan squinted, shading her eyes. A long line of dust moved across the horizon, rising and falling like smoke. Her heart grew uneasy. She had seen such trails before. Riders far away but moving quickly. She turned to her daughters. Go inside, she said quietly. Now. They obeyed at once. Inside, Thomas was fixing the strap on his saddlebag. He looked up when the girls entered. What's wrong? Nalan stepped in behind them. There are riders out there, she said calmly. Maybe far, maybe near. But they are not from our village. Thomas's face went pale. Riders? He reached for the small pouch that always stayed near his bedroll. It could be them, the men who followed me. Nalan's voice was steady. You must not stay here. If they are looking for you, they must not find you near us. Thomas stared at her. I can't just leave without warning. What if they see me? What if they... They will not, she said firmly. But you must go before they do. Ayana's eyes filled with worry. Mama, he is still weak. He cannot travel far. Nalan touched her daughter's hand. He will have to. The spirits have brought him this far. They will not fail him now. Thomas's hands trembled as he stood. You saved my life. I can't bring danger to your home. Nalan turned away for a moment, her expression unreadable. She began to gather a few things. Dried food, a water gourd, a blanket. When she came back, she held something else in her hands, the small leather pouch he had been searching for. Thomas froze. That's mine, he said softly. You found it. Yes, Nalan said. It was beneath your coat when my daughters carried you here. I kept it safe until you were ready to stand again. He took it carefully, relief flooding his face. Thank you, he said, his voice low. I thought it was lost. Nalan looked at him with calm eyes. Be sure you know what you carry, she said. Thomas frowned. It's only money, what I earned from my work. Her expression softened. Money feeds the hunger of men's hearts, but it never feeds their souls. Thomas didn't understand, not fully. You speak as if I should throw it away. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward and pressed the pouch into his hand. When you leave, she said quietly, do not open it until you are far from here. Ayana looked confused. Mama, what are you? Nalan raised her hand gently. No questions now. It is better you do not know. The sky outside had begun to darken again. The wind carried faint sounds. Faraway hooves, soft but growing louder. Thomas's breath quickened. They're coming closer, he said. I can hear them. Nalan nodded. Then there is no more time. She turned to her daughters. Saddle his horse quickly. Sani and Ayana ran outside, their hearts racing. The horse snorted and stamped its feet as they worked, sensing the tension in the air. Inside, Thomas stood near the doorway, his hand gripping the pouch. I will never forget you, he said. If I live long enough to tell it, your kindness will be known. Nalan met his gaze. Do not speak of us, she said softly. The desert protects what it loves by keeping it hidden. He nodded slowly, understanding at last. Then I will speak only of what I learned, that compassion can bloom even where the sun burns the hardest. When he stepped outside, the girl stood beside the horse. The world had turned gray, the first signs of dust swirling in the distance. Ayana's voice trembled. Will we see you again? Thomas smiled sadly. If the wind is kind, he said. Maybe. Nalan came forward, holding the reins. She looked at him one last time. Ride toward the mountains, she said. The storm will hide your tracks. Do not look back. He hesitated, wanting to say more, but something in her eyes stopped him. With a final nod, he mounted the horse and turned toward the horizon. The wind rose behind him, carrying sand and whispers through the air. The girl stood watching until the figure disappeared into the haze. When the last trace of his horse vanished, Ayanna turned to her mother. "What did you give him?" she asked softly. Nalin was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Not what he expected, but what he needed." Sani frowned. "You didn't give him the coins?" Nalin shook her head. "No. The money would only bring more men like those who hunted him. Instead, I gave him our medicine stones. They carry blessing, not curse. Let his journey be guided by peace, not greed." Ayanna's eyes widened. "But when he finds out," Nalin looked toward the horizon where Thomas had disappeared. "He will understand if his heart is ready." The sound of hooves echoed faintly once more, but from another direction now. The dust cloud moved past the canyon's edge, far from their home. The riders never saw the small hut hidden among the rocks. That night, the fire burned low and steady. The sisters sat close, their faces thoughtful. "Do you think he will be angry when he opens the pouch?" Sani asked quietly. Nalin stirred the fire with a stick. "Perhaps for a moment," she said. "But sometimes anger must come before understanding. When he remembers the hands that saved him, he will see the truth in what I did." Ayanna thought of Thomas's kind smile, his gentle way of speaking. "He will understand," she said softly. "I feel it." The three of them sat in silence for a long time, listening to the soft wind outside. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled low and deep. The desert was breathing again. Later that night, as they lay down to rest, Sani whispered, "Mama, will he come back?" Nalin looked up at the ceiling, where the firelight flickered in soft waves. "The desert decides who returns," she said. "But his spirit will remember this place." "That is enough." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall soft and steady. The earth drank the water eagerly, and the scent of wet soil filled the air. Far away beneath that same rain, Thomas rode until the storm covered every track he left behind. When he finally stopped to rest under a rock shelter, he opened the pouch Nalin had given him. Inside, he found no coins, only smooth, painted stones, each marked with a symbol he didn't recognize. At first, confusion crossed his face. Then slowly a smile spread across it. He remembered her words. "Gold brings men who kill. Spirit brings men who heal." He closed the pouch again, holding it to his chest. "You were right," he whispered into the wind. "You were right." And somewhere, miles away, the wind carried his words back through the canyon, wrapping them around a small hut where a mother and two daughters slept beneath the desert stars. Weeks passed after the storm rolled across the desert, washing away every footprint that had led to Nalin's small hut. The air turned cooler and wildflowers began to bloom in places where only dust had lived before. Life moved on quietly. Ayanna and Sani still woke early to gather herbs and fetch water from the creek. Their mother worked as always, tending to those in the village who came to her for healing. Yet sometimes when the wind blew from the east, all three of them would pause and look toward the horizon. It was a habit now, though none of them said aloud what they were thinking. Each evening when the sun dropped behind the mountains, Nalin would light a small fire outside their home. "The spirits find warmth in light," she always said, "and sometimes lost travelers find their way by it too." The sisters would sit beside her, listening to the quiet songs she sang. The songs were older than any memory, yet each time she sang them they felt new. Days turned to months. Thomas did not return, but the family did not speak of sadness, only of gratitude. "He is alive," Ayanna said one night. "That is what matters." "Yes," Nalin agreed. "He carries a piece of this land with him now, whether he knows it or not." Far from the canyon, in a small frontier town, Thomas Reed stood outside a general store, his horse tied to a post. His clothes were worn, his hat old, but there was a calmness in his face that had not been there before. He had made it through the mountains and across the plains, following rivers and stars. The journey had been long, but every night when he made camp, he would place the small leather pouch near his fire before sleeping. Inside were the stones Nalin had given him, smooth and colorful, with small markings carved into them. At first he hadn't understood them, but as the days passed he began to feel that each one carried something, a memory, a warmth, a lesson. The red one reminded him of the desert sunsets, the green one of the herbs the sisters gathered, The white one, of Nalan's calm eyes when she spoke of spirits and kindness. When he reached town, he sold his horse and found work at a small ranch. Life there was simple. He fixed fences, fed the cattle, and slept in a small cabin near the barn. The men around him talked often, of money, gold, and land. But Thomas stayed quiet. Something inside him had changed. One evening, while the others played cards, he sat alone by the fence looking up at the stars. The night sky here was not as wide as it had been in the desert, but it was the same sky. He took the pouch from his pocket and poured the stones into his hand. "You gave me these instead of gold," he whispered, "and maybe that's why I lived." He closed his eyes, hearing again Nalan's voice, calm, sure, full of the quiet strength of the desert. Gold brings men who kill. Spirit brings men who heal. For the first time, Thomas understood. He had been chasing something heavy, something that pulled men away from what was right. But those stones carried a lighter weight, one that filled rather than drained. Years went by. The world changed slowly around them all. The railway came closer to the towns. New settlers built homes. Some spoke of peace with the tribes. Others still carried old fear. Thomas worked hard, saved what he could, and never forgot the canyon. Sometimes he told others a story, not of money or danger, but of two Apache girls and their mother who saved a stranger's life. He told it softly, like a prayer, to anyone who would listen. Some people believed him. Others thought it was just a tale made to sound poetic. But those who looked into his eyes when he spoke knew it was real. One spring, many years later, Thomas decided to ride again toward the land that had once saved him. He was older now. His hair touched with gray, but his heart still carried the same quiet gratitude. He packed food, water, and the small pouch of stones. When someone asked why he was traveling alone, he smiled and said, "There's a promise in the wind that I need to keep." The journey took several days. When he reached the canyon, the desert greeted him like an old friend, silent, wide, and shining under the sun. He dismounted and walked to the place where he had once fallen. The land had changed a little, but the feeling was the same. He stood there for a long time, letting the wind brush against his face. Then he took the pouch from his coat, opened it, and held the stones in his hand. "You gave me life when I had none left," he said softly. "I came to bring something back." He knelt and placed the stones at the base of a rock near the creek, one by one, as if returning each to its rightful place. "May they find their way home," he whispered. When he looked up again, he thought he saw movement in the distance. Two figures near the canyon's edge, small and far away. The wind carried faint laughter, soft like the sound of a stream. For a moment, his heart lifted. He didn't know if it was memory or something more, but he smiled anyway. In the village, the same wind passed through the huts, brushing against Ayana's hair as she ground corn. She looked up suddenly, her eyes bright. "Mama," she said, "did you hear that?" Nalan was weaving a basket nearby. "What did you hear?" "The wind," Ayana said, smiling. "It sounded like someone saying thank you." Nalan paused, her hands stilling on the basket. Then she smiled too, that quiet, knowing smile her daughters loved. "The desert always answers kindness," she said softly. That night, as the stars covered the sky, Nalan lit the fire outside again. Ayana and Sani sat beside her, listening as she sang a new song, one they had never heard before. It spoke of a traveler lost and found, and of how mercy can cross even the widest lands. When she finished, Ayana asked, "Who taught you that one?" Nalan looked into the flames. "The wind," she said. "It carries stories back to those who wait." The years moved like gentle rivers, carrying time with them. Ayana grew into a woman, wise like her mother, strong like the desert. Sani became a healer, known for her laughter that could calm even the sick. People came from distant places to seek their help, and many stayed to listen to their stories. And always, when someone asked where their wisdom came from, Ayana would tell the same tale, of the man they once found in the desert and the lesson their mother had given him. She never spoke of gold or danger. She spoke only of choice, how a heart can choose peace over fear, kindness over anger, and how that choice can ripple across time. "Mercy," she would say, "is the strongest medicine of all." Many years later, travelers passing through the canyon began to tell their own stories. Some said they found a small pile of painted stones near the creek, untouched by wind or time. Others claimed that on quiet nights when the moon was full, you could hear laughter in the distance, light and soft, like two young girls playing in the dark, and a few, when camping near the canyon's heart, said they saw a faint light, the glow of a small fire burning where no one lived. They would hear a woman's voice singing to the stars, her song blending with the whisper of the wind. No one ever found the family's home again. The desert had taken it back, as it does with all things. But those who listened closely swore that the land itself remembered them, the healer, her daughters, and the stranger who carried their gift into the wider world. Years later, when people spoke of the old times, someone would always mention the legend. Two Apache girls saved a dying cowboy, and their mother gave him something no one could steal. Some told it as a fable. Some believed it as truth. But every version carried the same ending. That kindness once given never disappears. It travels on the wind from heart to heart, changing whoever it touches. And so, in the stillness of the Arizona desert, the story lived on, not carved in stone or written in books, but carried in the sound of the wind and the warmth of the earth. Some said that if you stood at the canyon's edge at sunrise, you could still feel it, a breath of air brushing your cheek, gentle and kind as if the desert itself was whispering,